Congresswoman, you seem to be getting at what I think a lot of us are trying to unpack here. And, you know, we so conflate politics and government sometimes, where everybody wants to point fingers at a political party. This feels like government bureaucracy that failed here, where we have some good intentions, but all of a sudden it is we've somehow gotten into bed with the industry to create the possibility of this crisis. Is that what we're staring at here, or sort of we're victims of here?
This is not a political issue. First of all, it's wonderful to be with you today, Chuck. The issue here is one of supply and is of food safety. You have a manufacturer, Abbott Nutrition in Michigan, who knowingly put on the market a contaminated product, infant formula that they knew was contaminated. If the reports, they falsified reports. They didn't test properly. They gave false information to the FDA when FDA did audits. So, and accurate with what some of your folks have said, you've got a consolidated industry where four manufacturers, the four major manufacturers there, they have almost 90% of the market. So when you move with Abbott, who has a recall, they have 43% of the market. You take that off the shelves. In fact, what you have is a shortage. So now fast forward, that a whistleblower, courageous whistleblower, sent a report to the FDA in October. In September last year, the FDA, when they did an audit, they had suspicion of contamination. October, whistleblower's report. They do not interview the whistleblower until December. In January, FDA goes back in, they find traces of contamination. In February, there is a recall. So in fact, yes, the FDA dragged its feet, didn't do what it was supposed to do, and so you have culpability with a manufacturer,
right?
You have at least 2 infants, Chuck, who have died.
Right.
4 have been hospitalized. Parents today are frantic. They can't find a supply, and if there is something, they're concerned. Our job is to move quickly on all fronts. The first thing is to get the product on the shelf, which is what the legislation was about last night, which is what the president is doing. But let me just say one thing about the product coming into the country. I am very clear where I think we need to be. We have 7 countries who provide infant formula overseas, who manufacture it. They are FDA approved. Those are the countries that we should be going to, and not just randomly accepting applications, etc. People do not have, are not FDA approved. We have this hearing, we have hearings next week. I'm dealing with a piece of legislation as well. Well, let me just say, the $28 million, that most of that money is for FDA in terms of an inspection team, where they don't have an inspection team. They only have 9 people looking at all of the infant formula submissions. But there's a bigger issue at FDA, and that's the issue of leadership. It's a structural problem. They need to do something about having a person there, not a czar. I'm sorry, I'm not for a czar, but I want the FDA, which is a regulatory agency, to have someone who oversees food safety, because it is a second-class citizen at the FDA.
Well, and look, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of how long it took to get an FDA commissioner. Don't forget, I mean, we went through that whole timeline, and all I'm thinking in my head is, like, wait a minute, we went through this rigmarole in order to get an FDA head, and so again, I want to set that aside. Look, let's talk about how to make sure this doesn't happen again, whether it's on formula. And, you know, I asked this yesterday of Senator Casey. We have a strategic oil reserve. We have a strategic cheese reserve. In 2015, up until 2015, we had a strategic raisin reserve, okay? And I'm not making that up. In hindsight, we probably should have had a strategic formula reserve. Is that something we're going to make sure? I mean, if we're going to have this consolidated market, just-in-time manufacturing, which I understand with supply chain, are we going to make them have a reserve, or us, the government, purchase enough to create a reserve?
Okay, let me just, 2 or 3 points, Chuck. One, for years, and I've been working on food safety for many, many years. What we need, in my view, is a single food safety agency where that's what the focus is. That's not the case with the FDA.
Separated out from the drugs. Pharmaceuticals should be separate.
That's
food
right.
should be separated. Yep.
Food, and Senator Durbin and I introduced that a long time ago. Secondly, in moving forward, yes, first of all, I'm going to introduce legislation in the next few days that deals with the regulatory authority of the FDA and tightening that up and looking at what we do with the National Strategic Stockpile and look at how we're able to add food to that issue. We're also going to be clear in terms of the Defense Production Act. I'm worried that we get into the fall and the ingredients issue may become an issue, but we were told that in terms of the Defense Production Act that we had to amend it in order to do this. So I have several pieces of legislation that will move us forward, but the underlying piece of this, Chuck, is that we cannot have a consolidated industry. You can't have sole source contracting because something like this happens, we are in a crisis. That has to be examined. And that not only has to be examined in the infant formula, but with meat packing, etc.
I was just going to say, it's not like this is a surprise. We had it with the meatpacking industry at the start of COVID, and we had it when Johnson & Johnson had vaccine ingredient issues. When they had a plant that went down, it suddenly set that back. So it does seem as if we've got, yes, it's the supply chain, but it's how we've allowed the supply chain to be used, the just-in-time aspect of this. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. I think we have allowed industry. We don't produce infant formula at the federal level, but we have an agency that has the regulatory authority, and that they have to lay out the requirements that manufacturer has to follow in order to be able to enter into commerce in the United States. That has got to be the clarity around that issue. That is fundamental to what we're talking about today. But immediately, Chuck, we're moving. We have to move. We want to get that supply on the shelves so that parents are not up all night worrying about whether or not they're doing their job as a parent and making sure their child is safe.
I think the only thing we got to worry about now is hoarding. As it gets on, I hope people don't overly hoard on this stuff. But Congresswoman, if folks just take away one thing from our conversation, I hope it's folks look more into your bill on separating food and drug from that agency and creating that. It makes a lot of sense considering what we've been watching. Congresswoman, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you, Chuck.